Asteroid of fear.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Men of the House podcast. And on today's episode, I have Clint Mally with me. And we're going to talk about what is biopsychosocial care. And then we're going to talk about a few things kind of around that. He's going to help me to answer some questions on how to determine maybe if you need a little mental health checkup, and then also some steps to helping people make change. I know we all want to make change of some sort, so possibly for you and possibly for maybe your significant other or whatever. Y'all can kind of keep each other accountable, if you will,
Mm.
and do it together because it's definitely easier to do it together. So, how you doing today, Clint?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to talk about mental health and talk to men as a man myself. So I'm excited about this.
Awesome. Well, as I do with everyone, give us a little bit about your background, maybe a little bit about where you grew up, what you thought you wanted to do, and subsequently how you ended up here. Because there's usually some sort of catalyst that drives us to sitting face to face. Mine was a layoff, and I
Mm.
decided to become a podcaster and kind of entrepreneur. And so I'm always interested in what led us to be face to face talking about things that we're passionate about.
Yeah. So, growing up, my family was full of addiction. Addiction was like a big part of it. My mom's alcoholic, my dad addicted to meth. And so I quickly, as I was growing up and I was making friends and I was hanging out with other people, I was realizing that, other people's families are not like my family. I'd watch sitcoms on TV, I'd watch, movies, and I'd say something is different, right? My life is different. And as I grew up, I knew that I wanted something that was more stable. I knew that I wanted more family support. I wanted to really kind of be like my friends and their family and have parents who, checked in on them and asked if they did their homework and, made them lunch and like all the things that come with being a kid and a family. And for me, it was very independent. They were not doing those things. They kind of left me to just do my thing. They never asked, I never got in trouble for any behavior at school. I never got asked about my grades. Never was asked to come home at a certain time, what to
What was that
wear, what
like?
to eat.
Did your friends envy that? Because I know like I'm thinking of my childhood and my parents weren't quite that lax. Um
Mm.
I describe them kind of as hippie-ish. They never said don't do this. They just said, "Hey, this is what will happen if you do." But how did the people you hung around with, how did they view the freedom versus how you viewed it?
Yeah, it was definitely what you would think a middle schooler or an elementary schooler's dream would be, right? You have no boundaries at all. And so my friends loved it. So whenever we were going to get into some bad stuff, my house was the place to do it, or my place was the place to do it. Right. And but then there's also the dark side of that, right? There's also the side of it, like, you come home and all the doors are locked. And what are you going to do? Like, you're hungry, you got to use the bathroom. You can't get in. So I had to like try and break into my house a lot, um, or you need a ride somewhere, or you have like a school function that you're supposed to do. And so there was a good and bad side to it. What it helped me do is it helped me make a lot of friends because I knew that if I wanted to eat sometimes, then I needed to make sure I was at a friend's house, right? Or if I wanted to get
Yeah.
somewhere, I needed to make some friends. So I think it made me also more social. Um, but also, there's the dark side of it. Hey, this isn't a good thing. Like something about this seems off and wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and so as I got older, I got really heavy into religion because I wanted like some sort of family dynamic. And so I grew up in the South in Atlanta, and so
Okay.
Christianity was a huge part of that. And so
I'm
I
from
got really heavy
Texas.
into the church. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
I
It's like
do.
everything is Jesus in church. And that was cool. And that was a good thing for me because it gave me some structure. But throughout that process, um, I think I became a little bit too much of a zealot, as you might do. I became
Mhm.
really intense about it. And there was some problems within that kind of dynamic, right? Like there's like my mental health was never addressed, right? If you think about most spirituality, spirituality is about like following a book or a set of a code, a way of life, and being in a community. But there was all kinds of customs and things about my own mental health that I never really learned, right? That religion wasn't going to be able to fill. While it gave me some friends and it gave me some community, there were some huge parts of like my development that were never happened. I was very manipulative. I would cheat on relationships like that I had. I would, obviously I was doing drugs and stuff, and this was what I saw. And so, um, I was kind of like a narcissistic kid, I guess, very self-centered because I had to be, because I learned that I had to be strong alone. And as I grew up, those problems became worse and worse. As you have money and you get autonomy and you can take care of yourself more, that became not a good thing. Um, and so after enough time of like a completely damaging long-term relation, it was like I could not go a year without doing something to dramatically damage my character,
Oh,
right?
wow.
And so after enough time, even the therapy or even the spiritual leaders at my church are like, yo, you need to go to therapy. Um, like, well, the Bible ain't gonna help this. Whatever this is, the Bible's not gonna help this. And so I went to therapy, and it was just for a summer, and I was in college, and it was a really, really impactful thing for me, right? It taught me about my past and not blaming, my
Right.
upbringing and my parents on my past and taking responsibility for my actions. And especially with men, and this is like a really important thing that I've come to understand more and more as I've been in this field with mental health, is that men kind of need confrontation when it comes to mental health and when it comes to support, right? So oftentimes women, and the field is usually dominated by women. Women will need safety, and they want to feel like they're in a safe place to be able to open up because they've been historically marginalized and oppressed and a lot of things.
Right.
Men who, especially white dudes like myself, who come from a place of privilege, who come from, a history of patriarchy or whatever, they need somebody to confront them and to call them on their stuff. And this therapist did that. I would try and blame my parents and my upbringing and all this stuff. This therapist was having none of that. And from there, I was able to really start transitioning my life around. Where I failed out of college before, I was able to go back to college and graduate with a bachelor's and eventually a master's in teaching. I entered the classroom. I learned that I love communicating more than I love being in front of kids.
Yeah.
And so then I had a brother who passed away from a heroin overdose. And so I realized that I wanted to use my skills, my communication talents, all my teaching background to help educate young folks about mental health and then about mental health in a way that was simple and clear and that anyone could understand. I hope that sets the stage a little
Yeah,
bit.
it does. And I had a couple of things. I mean, one, growing up in quite a religious place myself, and during the time I was there, I felt like the religious context was kind of very hypocritical. And so I find it interesting and almost admirable a little bit that they were able to tell you, hey, this is not for you. You might need to try therapy. I feel like that is a far departure from the religion I grew up with, where it's
Mm,
maybe more like a shaming or deeper into religion as if religion is gonna fix that. But I was thinking too,
yeah,
like you grew up on one side and then you went to the complete opposite side. And I've done kind
exactly.
of both too. And I think some of it is nature of surroundings. This is what's available to us. Um, and you're also kind of like maybe I don't know where I'm at, so why not try this? But like with most things, I don't I think the truth is somewhere in the middle, as
Mm,
opposed to opposing ends of either side. I mean, you don't know alcoholics and drug addicts who are just crushing it. Um, and then
yeah.
you have,
Yeah.
let's say you might have religious people like Joel Osteen who might be crushing it according to some
Mm,
standards, but then doesn't want to open the door for flood victims or whatever you might want to call it. So, and that hypocrisy side where I think, most truth is kind of, and the sweet spot is in the middle, because that's often been a struggle, I think, is one of my issues with where I grew up and religion was that, you know, I felt like people had this idea like, oh, we can go out Saturday night to the pasture party and hook up with these chicks and whatnot. And as long as we're at church on Sunday, that makes it
mm,
okay. Where I always felt like I've been questioning and seeking God my entire life internally, and
mm,
always kind of known. And I felt like that nobody can really judge your personal faith. There's not a detector, there's no way to really measure it. And I don't think showing up at church every Sunday is the measurement.
mm.
I think it's a place or something you can do to kind of cultivate it, just like I went for a jog this morning for my health and my fitness. Um, but I read a daily Bible passage. I do like a one a day type of thing, but I haven't been to a formal religious institution in a long time, other than maybe if I was invited to a baptism of a family friend. But
Yeah.
that's kind of how I feel about it. Um, you know, I would say I'm still a seeker. I still believe, I still have faith that there's something bigger and greater out there, and that goodness always wins over evil.
Mm,
But I definitely steer away, and it's still a religious town. I remember a friend of mine from New York coming once to visit, and it's um it's like 14 miles, this long highway between like a small town and the major hub. And he's like, dude, I just counted like 17 churches in 14 miles. And it's
yeah. On
like
both
church,
sides of the road. Yeah.
yep, church bank is all churches and banks. But
Mm,
yeah. So yeah, and very similar to you. I mean, my uncle, he passed away he didn't OD from heroin, but he subsequently caught HIV from the intravenous drug use because it was in the 70s and 80s and whatnot overseas. And, um, he got stationed in Germany, married a German woman, stayed over there, and ended up on heroin over there. And even though I think he was able to kick that, he eventually, and this was in the 90s, like 93, I think. And, it was just quite a perspective shift because at that time, it was related mostly to homosexuality. And I
so
saw
much
my uncle,
stigma.
yeah, and I saw him go from, somebody who was like, let's say 240 pounds, 6'2" to 150 pounds, like a shell of himself. And, I can remember asking either my mother or my grandmother, um, does he have HIV? And it was like, yeah. So, but yeah, I kind of get it too. And,
Yeah.
given
Can
your
I
back,
ask you?
yeah,
I was going to ask, how, so you talked about that kind of pendulum, and I totally agree. That was definitely the case with me. You're on one side of extreme no boundaries, no parental guidance. So you go to the other side and become overly religious. And now it seems like you've kind of wound up in this place where you're not operating by maybe the set values that traditional Christianity or whatever sets forth with going to church and institution or whatever,
right.
but you still have your own faith. How did you wind up in that middle road?
Um, I think I've always been there, and I think some of it has to do with growing up in a place like this. And because my parents, I described them kind of as they're like conservative liberals, kind of hippies. Um, it's about making the important things important. And so in a small town like this, a lot of people who are unfamiliar, I'll lay it out that, you know, it's kind of like recruitment. You maybe you attend after school function just because you
Mhm.
need somewhere to go with a friend. And then next thing you know, the pastor shows up at your house and they're talking to your parents about being saved and do they know Christ and this and that, the other. And, my mother, I can remember one instance, and that was the last time my mother just said, look, he's whatever, 10 years old, 11 years old. When he's educated enough to make decisions about religion, then he can choose what he wants to do. But because I got burned really bad as a child on my legs, and I spent months in a burn hospital. I was baptized Catholic because they thought I was going to die, and so I was already
Wow.
baptized. But my mom was like, that's up to you to decide. And
Mm.
so I think knowing that, I was still I had that faith, but I didn't agree with everybody going out to the pastor parties because I wasn't like that. Like, I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and I knew, like, if you got in any trouble, anything like that, that was a no-go. So I watch my P's and Q's. And I think, when I went in the Navy, you have to, I guess for your dog tags, they ask what religion you are. And I was Roman Catholic and by baptism. And then, I would go to kind of a non-denominational service during boot camp because that's kind of your way to get away and listen to some music. But I think over time, I did some things that I'm not proud of in my life, and I felt like I kind of stepped away because I felt like I was kind of beyond forgiveness and
Mm.
felt like I could never be forgiven. And so I kind of turned to like kind of self-destruction of a not care of like, if I'm too far gone to be saved anyway, um, God could never love me, then I might as well just do what I want. And then, through I don't think I really, and it's interesting because I think people could look at a period of my life and go like he wasn't a believer. It wasn't that I wasn't a believer. Um, I just felt so shamed and bad for what I'd done that I put that on myself. And and so I always kind of stayed in those lanes. And then I dated a girl who we would go to like a non-denominational church together, and it was more modern with, kind of rock style music, and
Yep.
I enjoyed that. And then kind of um it wasn't great. Her parents, her dad especially hated me. And so it was like after that, after we broke up, and it was kind of because of him, it again kind of went back to that like these are religious people. They say they're all that, but they're kind of the most hateful people. And
Yeah.
and so, and I think it's been, let's see, I've been with my wife 18 years. And so it's kind of been on and off.
Congrats.
I go through, thank you. I go through periods of reading and not. And, I think with after being laid off 4 years ago and kind of starting my own thing, um, I've really kind of got back into my personal faith of like, hey, like I quit drinking over a year ago, and that was like bouncing back and forth like a ping pong ball, where I
Mm.
might have 2 years of sobriety and then go off the rails for 5 years. And
Mm.
so I think it was a combination of, um, 2 years ago, marriage, career, everything was just kind of in the dump. And I needed to make a change, and um, kind of starting with some of that spirituality. And I can't do this alone. I want to stop drinking. I want to be a better father. I want to be a better husband. Um, all those things. And I think that's, my faith is about my relationship with God,
Right.
not anybody else's perception of it. Only if you come into my office and see the Bible would you probably know that I read the Bible every day. So
Mm.
that's kind of how I ended up there.
Yeah, there's a lot of context and nuance that you talked about that I appreciate. You know, you had some guardrails, right? On the one hand, you had a mom who allowed you to be able to say, hey, I'm going to put a boundary in place so that these outside influences don't try to sway or persuade my son without him having a fully developed brain and the autonomy and knowledge to be able to make these decisions himself. And then you also had goals, right? You had
Yeah.
goals of going to the Naval Academy and trying to have a certain life, right? And so that might have made you stay away from the other side. And then you also, you would go back and forth between stuff that you had done where you felt shame or guilt keeping you away from like a over religious community, but at the same time not being super happy with the way that your life was going and wanting to be able to be a better father, a better husband, and so needing some support in that way. So you had things on both sides that were kind of, as you mentioned, as ping-ponging you back and forth to where you're at today to be able to, like Bruce Lee, choose the things that work for you and then to push away the things that don't, right? To be like
Yeah.
water in that way. So I think that's a really cool way that you kind of explained it. It does paint a really good picture for how you were able to find a more balanced and nuanced, faith and perspective.
Yeah, and and that's the thing is I'm not against, like, if you're able to drink and you can handle it, then you do it. It's just not for me, and I'm not, you don't have to worry about me. And it's the same with religion. It's like, if that's your if that's your vibe and your church, and you know there's nothing saying I won't go to church in the future or any of those things. um and I say the same thing about corporate careers. Like, it was not for me. Sometimes I wish it were. Sometimes it's a lot easier. There's a lot of benefits of 401ks and this and that that are available to people in that space who aren't entrepreneurs. But, it's taken me a long time to learn how my brain works, where and with
Mm,
who I have issues with, and then
mm,
also the things I'm aligned with. I think, like I work in the hospital field, and, you work within that arena of a caregiving, care, helping people, serving people. And when you do that and you work for these things, I go, they didn't all start off bad. I go, they all start off with a good intention for a purpose. And somebody was out there trying to solve this problem. But once something gets so big and too many hands get into it, and then everybody wants their hand in the cookie jar, where's my piece? Where's my piece? Where's my piece? Then it becomes about everything that it's not. And
mm,
um, and it gets watered down and diluted a little bit, and that's just not for me.
mm,
And that's one thing I always try to be careful is, like, hey, like, you do you, your path is your path, your journey is your journey. Mine is for me. I have my reasons, just like with religion. I have my reasons for not wanting to be in a corporate career or whatever. But it's taken 48 years and a lot of learning, a lot of understanding, a lot of sitting through pain, a lot of trial and error, understanding that. And, and I think it was ultimately, um, when I got laid off, for me, that was the first time I'd ever been laid off at like 44 years old, fired, anything. And it crushed my identity because caretakers, it's who we are, it's not what we do. And so it crushed my identity. But then through sitting through it, journaling, praying, everything, I realized my identity is I'm a kind, caring, compassionate person who wants to serve. I've always been in service, whether it was through the military, the hospitals, food service, anything, making people happy, making their life better. That's my identity. How I choose to express it is just now different. It used to be healthcare, and I was limited to the two ambulatory clinics I ran and the people I touched there. With a podcast, your outreach and your touch is kind of unlimited. And so
mm,
I'm still that same person. And it took me a little bit to figure that out, that, hey, what part of the identity did it crush? Or maybe my identity was just in the wrong place. Or maybe I've my true identity is there, but like I said, how I'm able to express it will be different because I got asked the other day, hey, I mean, same thing. If this podcast went away, would it crush me? Probably not. Yes, I would be disappointed, but at the same time, um, I realize my true identity and I would just find a different way to do it. I also do Uber Eats on side of podcasting, and I love it because I love to make other people's life easier, and especially like if it's a 50-pound dog food to the second floor, or you pull into somebody's driveway and you see that they have a handicap van with wheelchair access, and you're like, man, I'm happy to deliver your 100 pounds of dog food. I'd probably do it for free, but it came through the app. Um, and so I love it. And, um, it's people look at me and they go, well, you were a healthcare leader and you had 2 clinics and doctors and nurses and front desk that you managed. And now you do Uber Eats and podcasts. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm happy, I'm fulfilled, and
Mm,
I get to reach more people. And just even things like, going in and picking up the order and just trying to smile and trying to make sure that, hey, maybe you're the one piece positive word, encouragement, smile that that fast food worker sees all day. You never
mm.
know. So that's kind of how I try to live my life.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think it's unique to be able to say, yeah, I'm happy. When's the last time we spend so much time thinking about our goals, thinking about the things that we want to do, thinking about the things that we don't have. And a key thing that I notice with people is that many people have a hard time identifying and saying that they feel happy, that they're actually good, right?
Yeah,
That if you never get another day of life, that you're okay with it,
that'd be
you
good.
know?
Yeah, I would be. I think of it as um, I always kind of define it as a lack of want or a lack of need. And I don't mean need like your basic needs like shelter, but I mean like I don't need for anything. I don't want anything. I'm okay with everything I have, and everything I have is enough. And sometimes it ain't much, but that's okay. And I've come to understand that some of the happiest times of my life were in those simpler times, when you kind of break it down to basics and you're like, hey, my basic needs are met. I get to do what I want to do every day. I get to spend as much time with my wife and daughter and, get to have these conversations. I mean, life's pretty good. But let's
Yeah.
go back to, what is biopsychosocial care? Let's define that and we'll start heading that direction in terms of, because this is all relevant, but yeah, I want to
Yeah.
make sure I give the audience a little piece of that and what you do.
Yeah. So if you've ever tried to, as you've mentioned, better your mental health, overcome an addiction, um, reduce anxiety or depression, uncover and work through trauma, and you've struggled, you're not alone. And it's usually because you've been missing one of the three factors of healthcare, of like real mental health care. And we call that biopsychosocial care. And it's like a three-legged stool in that if any one of those pieces is missing, then you are not going to be able to recover or to be able to advance or to have, prosperity outside of your mental health, right?
I
That's going
picture
to
a
be
guy
much
busting
harder.
his butt, sitting on a two-legged stool and just, ugh.
Yeah, exactly, And so oftentimes we'll attach to one of these three things, bio, psycho, or social care. And we'll be like, oh, this didn't work for me. This isn't working. But really, it's because we're missing all three. And so, like, just really briefly to kind of give you an overview, let's talk about bio, psycho, and social. So, bio is the physical part of your healthcare, mental health care, right? So by this, we think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You need food, you need sleep, and you need safety, right? That's also something in Maslow's hierarchy of needs that people, if you don't feel safe, if you're hungry or if you're tired, It doesn't matter how skilled a clinician is. It doesn't matter how amazing a group therapy session is or what type of treatment is being used. If you're hungry and tired or you don't feel safe, you're not going to be able to sit in a chair. You're not going to be able to improve in your mental health. So, like, we also call this biocare when we think about medication management. So, if I'm somebody who struggles with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, or if I'm trying to detox from a substance and I don't have some sort of medical supervision or what they call medication assisted treatment, then
Hmm.
it's also going to be really hard, right? If I'm having cravings actively, I do not care what you're saying to me,
Well,
right?
not
Like
only
that's not
that
the,
though, the I was thinking of the converse of people who are like bipolar, they don't like taking their medicine, and you almost need somebody to ensure that they take the medicine.
Yes, exactly. And all of us need that at some time, right? We all need somebody to help us support and to kind of teach us these skills, like sleep hygiene and like being able to get enough rest. It's a real thing.
Oh yeah, when I was in boot camp, I'm like, in the military and probably like your special operators and whatnot, the lack of sleep is the one thing that will almost creep into your mind and go, screw this. I don't have to do this anymore because I am so tired.
Yep. It's a huge point. And if you think about cults, so like cults, a big way that they reduce susceptibility to influence or increase susceptibility to influence is through sleep and food deprivation, right? So if you want to make a human being more malleable to negative influences, don't give them enough food, don't give them enough sleep. And, when we think about torture too, like the way governments use torture, there's like all kinds of things that people generally think about when it comes to torture. We think about medieval torture. We think about, terrible ways that you
The
can try
guy
and extract
handcuffed to the
information.
chair.
Right. Yeah. But by far the most effective and like the most consistent way that organizations have found to be able to extract information is through sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation reduces your ability to have self-control and willpower to be able to focus on more creative pursuits or self-actualization. And so it's the foundation. You need bio care, right? And so if I'm somebody and I'm struggling with my mental health, I'm asking myself, am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating enough food? Do I have the medication I need? And am I safe? So that's the first one.
Makes sense because I know when I went on antidepressants at some point in my career, um, I went to my PCP and I was like, I think I'm depressed and like I'm not sleeping, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, well, the first thing we have to do is get you some sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. So the second part is psycho or psychological care. And there's a few different ways to think about this. There's the patterns of thinking that you have, right? There's trauma that you've experienced. There's ways that you cope with stress, right? And all of those things are a part of psychological care. So the biggest and probably one of the most important things, no matter what type of therapy you're going to be doing, is you need ways, tangible ways to regulate your emotions that are what we call positive coping mechanisms. When you experience stress or heartache or emergencies or general variability within your emotions, how do you deal with it? And the interesting thing about psychological care is that we can only learn this through other humans, right? So when we come into this world and we're babies, we have what's called mirror neurons, where we're looking at the face of our caregivers, and our heartbeat will slow down when our caregiver's heartbeat slows down. And our breathing will match the pace of our caregiver's breathing, and will actually match facial expressions even as an infant, right? If a caregiver is frowning or if a caregiver is smiling, we've all seen this happening as an infant. Something that we come into this world being able to do is to connect and to co-regulate with our caregiver. Now, as a baby, that makes a lot of sense, right? You have to be able to lean on your caregiver to communicate when you need food or changing or whatever. But as the complexity of problems increases as you get older, that need for your caregiver to be able to show you how to regulate your emotions doesn't change,
Oh,
right? So it's just more complex.
that's interesting.
You get insulted as a child, right? And how do you respond to that? You actually need someone to show you. If you are hurting, right, from pain, or you make a mistake, or you're nervous about a presentation at school, or you any matter of things, when you experience that stress, you still need your parent to be able to help you to co-regulate. You or at least one healthy adult that can teach you a positive way to respond to stress. And if we don't learn those patterns of thinking, and by the way, it's not a fault to parents. Most parents are just doing the best they can. They parent the way that they were parented. And so there's like cycles of these
Or
things.
they parent the complete opposite because of the way they were parented.
Yes, that's a
But
good
there
point.
is no rule book. And,
Yeah.
I was making a decision, my daughter was sick and I had to go pick her up, and it's been like 3 days of it, and we're like, we don't want her to miss school, but because it's early in the year, but and it's like it's up to me, and I'm like, well, my thing is I want to build trust with my daughter. I
Mm,
convinced her, encouraged her to take the step to try and make it through the day, and she couldn't. And subsequently, I said, if you can't, you call me and I will come get you. And that's
mm,
what she did. But, then there was my wife and I back and forth, like, well, I would make her stay, maybe, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, it's about long term for me. It's about building trust so that my daughter knows that whatever she needs me for, whenever she needs me, I'll answer, I'll pick up, I'll be there, because, it's about we're raising little humans.
mm.
Um, I'm trying to teach them everything I know.
Yeah.
Um, and I know they won't avoid it all, but I interviewed a gentleman whose 16-year-old daughter unalived herself. And
Mm.
and I think about that, and I go, he would do anything to have another moment with her. But
Yes.
also, what if, what kept her from coming to him? You
Yep.
know, I don't know, but I know that that interview impacted me enough to where every time I'm at odds with my daughter, or she's just being a turd, a stinker, she's a kid,
Yeah.
um, I remember that, and I go, what's the goal here is help her through life, help her regulate, teach her how, because school and all that stuff, that's just stuff that can be learned.
Hmm.
But this is the stuff I never learned from my parents.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a former teacher, I look back at my time in the classroom and I wish I would have spent more time teaching people how to regulate their emotions in a positive way, do what therapists call positive coping mechanisms, right? Nobody just out of nowhere, when they experience stress, does breath work or a breathing exercise or does any other type of positive coping mechanism just naturally. We have to remember that we learn how to regulate our emotions through other people, what we see demonstrated and what we know it exists, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like a lot of what you're trying to do with your daughter is about establishing what we call a secure attachment style. And there's four major attachment styles. There's secure attachment, right? There's anxious attachment, where a caregiver or a parent sometimes is present, but sometimes is not. And so the kid feels like they have to perform or people please and they grow up and they, repeat this in their own relationships in order to get love. There's an anxious avoidant attachment style, which in my case was kind of like you learn that you have to be strong alone, that the parent is saying, hey, I'm not going to give you support. You need to figure this out. And so it forces you to do all kinds of other types of coping mechanisms to be able to stand out and to show that you're strong and to present a certain way of living. And then there's avoidant attachment, which is where you fear your primary caregiver, right? The person who's supposed to be a source of comfort, supposed to teach you how to do these things
Right.
of regulating your emotions, now becomes the very source of fear. Or they often call this a disorganized attachment style. All of that to say, like for psychological care, it's about learning patterns of thinking and ways to cope with stress that over time will only benefit you. So this is the how you can tell the difference between a positive and a negative coping mechanism. A negative coping mechanism is that if I continue to do this thing, it will get worse and worse for me, right? So think about you have a hard day at work, you come home, you drink a beer to unwind and relax. Not a big deal done in isolation. One time, no big deal. But if that is your coping mechanism, anytime you feel stress, we can see how it'll spiral out into addiction and dependency, right? But a positive coping mechanism is if I continue to do this, my life is actually going to get better. It's going to go in the opposite direction, right? And so, as men, like as you're looking at the way that you respond to stress, ask yourself, if I continue to respond to stress in this way, is this going to make my life better or is it going to make it worse? And if it's not, then chances are you have to learn some new coping skills to regulate your emotions and respond to stress better. So that's psychological care. And that's often done in the therapy room, whether it's processing your trauma,
Yeah.
using cognitive behavioral therapy to recognize patterns of thinking, dialectical behavioral therapy to learn how distress tolerance or how to do breathing work or how to be able to like analyze and be mindful of your emotions. That's that piece.
You
You
know
with
what's
me so far?
interesting is yeah,
Yeah.
but when you were talking about the mirror component, we need others, and I think about um
Feeling totally drained? Been a long freaking week? If you're searching for ways to manage stress and find a little bit more peace, the Podcast Connection Network is here for you. We've got amazing shows on mental health, mindfulness, and all kinds of ways to live healthier, happier lives. Check out all the other shows, including my podcast, Connection Over Perfection, after this episode. The link is in the description below. Now let's get back to the show.
how I used to deal with stress, which was a beer or a whiskey. However, I mean, it's no secret, but it was just like aha for me is like that's what you grow up seeing is men. Your father, my dad worked construction. What do they do at the end of a day? Drink. My uncle, almost retired welder, still like a six pack every day at the end of work. And so that's what's
Yeah.
modeled to you. And when I went in the military, I went in the Navy at 17. um, it wasn't any better. And then I got to Japan, had my 19th birthday there, but there was no drinking age. So, when we went to Hong Kong, Thailand, and everywhere in Japan, it was like that was what you did. You worked all day, or when you're on deployment and you're working 7 days a week, 12 to 18 hours a day, and you hit port for 5 days, you blow off steam.
Mm,
It's not you think it's a positive coping mechanism because that's how it's been presented your whole life. This is what men
yeah.
do.
Yeah. And you're really tying into the final piece of this, which is social care, right? Which is the environment and the community that surrounds you, right? And similar to like positive and negative coping mechanisms, is this community a net positive for your goals, your well-being, the things that you want to accomplish in your life, the kind of person that you want to be, your core values? Or is this an environment that's not that way, right? So we need to connect with people who align with our core values, right? And who we share common interests with and who support us, right, in a positive way. So sometimes this is through group therapy where we are saying, okay, these are all people who want to live a better life and are going to be vulnerable about their struggles. And through that, we can connect and support and help each other. Sometimes this is through the family and friend component where you have a supportive network of people who know how to listen. They can reflect back what you're saying. They can help you process how you're feeling, and if you're struggling, you feel comfortable being able to lean on them for support, right? And if you zoom out and you take a look at any one of those three components and you remove any of them, right? So if I know that I'm don't if I'm working on positive coping skills, but I'm in an environment in a social network that doesn't support me, it's going to be really hard to change. Or if I'm not getting any sleep, but everybody wants me to change, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to be
Yeah.
able to change. And so biopsychosocial care understands that we're a whole person and that we need these three components in order to live a happy and a healthy life. And so you as a person can do an inventory and say, okay, which of these is kind of missing? And which is the one that I want to get support with first? Usually it's going to be biocare, then it's going to be psychological care, and then it's going to be social care in that order. But all three are essential and you need all of them.
I had a question. So
Yeah.
there's that whole saying of like, you're kind of a sum of the five people you spend the most time with.
Mhm.
And, I would say one, just with the way my mental health worked and drinking a lot, I was more of an isolator. And so I didn't spend time with those five people. But, when we were talking about that social aspect, the importance of keeping the five people around you um, to a certain, I guess, standard, so they're not bringing you down. But would you consider, like, let's say I just quit alcohol and I'm working on self-improvement. I'm gonna get a therapist and whatnot. Is that therapist, would you consider them to be one of your five people? Like as you're getting well, as part of your circle, a positive influence? Or like if you're in a group therapy session, the other people in the group, do those people become like the five since they're in the supportive arena? Even though they may
Yeah,
not
it's a
be like your family or what you're doing outside, but obviously it's what you were doing outside or in isolation that led to the problem.
yeah. So when you think about social, it's about who are you connecting with, right? Who are the people? So if I work in an environment and my boss is a jerk, and this boss is constantly being really toxic to me, maybe they yell at me, maybe they call me names, right? Maybe they make me they never show appreciation, yada yada. You go down the list. Whether we like it or not, we are in community with that person, right? Because they're such a significant part of who we're interacting with on a daily basis, right? And that's why work is so important. And that's why, workplace happiness and being able to establish strong relationships is a really important thing. But essentially, I think the bigger question with this is, do you have core values and have you set boundaries? And here's what I mean, and here's why I'm framing it this way. Most people, whether it's friendships, work relationships, or romantic relationships, what happens is they are in a relationship with somebody and somebody does something to them that makes them unhappy. And then they get mad about it. And either they internalize it and say nothing, or they tell this person that it makes them mad, right? But what is usually the case is that person has never, before that point, expressed what is important to them and expressed any boundaries. So, for example, I get into a relationship and I say, honesty is like super important to me, right? And for me, like it's important that I can trust my partner and that they don't cheat on me. If you cheat on me, I'm not going to be in a relationship with you. Like I'm setting a boundary, which is like a line in the sand based upon my core values. But what I think most people go into relationships doing is they don't even know what's important to them, right? If you ask most people, hey, what are your core values? What are the things that are like really important to you as a person, right? Is it honesty? Is it integrity? Is like, collaboration? Like, what is the stuff that's really important to you? They don't even know that. And if you don't even know what your core values are, how does anyone else, how can you expect anyone else to understand that as well? And that's why that psycho component
Mm-hmm.
needs to be worked on first before you go into like a social environment. Because if you don't know what's important to you, then you're only going to be reacting when other people do something that makes you mad and you never expressed it or even internalized it yourself, right?
Yeah.
Um, so you have to learn how to like understand yourself in order to like also communicate with your network. All that to say, like, I think your social network is broad. It could be a
Mhm.
lot of people, it could be a few people, but I think generally the axiom of, hey, your mental happiness is going to be about the people who you connect with the most. I think that's generally true. I don't know the degree, I don't know who counts,
Right.
but I would say it's about the time that you spend with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. Cause, it's like doing what I do unless I get out there and Uber and kind of interact with strangers. My core group is like my wife, my daughter, my mother, my father, who I see most days. So it's interesting, but at the same time too, I do like group coaching, I do business coaching. I'm part of a podcast connection network. And so I have those groups of people, and obviously, my interaction with them is different and sometimes on a deeper level in a different way than with um my wife or my daughter, and maybe because some of it's tied to profession or I don't know, but it's like my wife, my daughter, my mom, they don't know the technical aspects of podcasting, or they wouldn't know where to
Sure.
start, so it's kind of irrelevant to them. But yeah, very interesting. But what I wanted to go over this, if somebody wants to know either about themselves or maybe somebody close to them. We had a question here on it's like when to seek mental health treatment, and 8 questions you could ask anyone to determine if they need it. And
Yeah.
does that mean like, I mean, we're not talking like you need to go to inpatient program or something. We're talking about, hey, you might have some surface level things that you need to address, or you could have
Yeah.
potentially have some really deep rooted issues that you need to address.
Yeah, so let's go through this real quick. This will be a helpful thing, and listeners or watchers, you can kind of follow along as we're doing this. Ask yourself this, if this is the case with you or if you have someone in mind. This will be a helpful thing. And the cool thing is it's a lot of yes or no questions, right? So I'll say this like in the second person, but you can apply this to the third person if it's relevant. So for example, okay, so our first question is, are you no longer interested in the stuff that you used to enjoy? Right? Are there things that are happening in your life that when you look back and like you had passions or hobbies that were really important to you, now they're no longer important to you. You don't care about them at all, right? Um, and keep track of these, right? If it's if yeah, you're not interested in the things you used to enjoy, that will might be what we call a red flag, right? Second question is, have you been isolating yourself from others more than usual? You talked about how in your own journey, you
Mm-hmm.
noticed that when you're struggling with this, you isolated. And oftentimes it's due to guilt and shame, and people have different reasons, but it's usually an underlying factor that, like most animals, when they are in stages of distress, will isolate themselves.
Hmm.
And so humans are no different. So if that's you, if you're isolating yourself, that's a red flag. Um, Next up is, have you noticed a decrease in your performance at school or at work, right? So whether you're a student or you're at work, you notice that like you're just not yourself. You keep missing things, you keep messing up meetings, key things. People are noticing you're on a performance improvement plan. People are starting to notice, and you're noticing, even if they don't notice. If you are dipping in those things, that's a red flag. The fourth question is, have you noticed distinct mood changes? So this could be stuff making you angry or upset that normally wouldn't bother you. Maybe you're pretty resilient to certain things, but sometimes now when it happens, you get fly off the handle or you're in tears in a second. That is another red flag that, hey, maybe we need to think about our mental health. Next is, have you been using any substances to cope with, depression or trauma, anxiety, really any stress? If that's the case, if you're turning to a substance in order to be able to deal with that, that's a problem. That's a red flag, right? Next up is, have you found, so when you think about your loved one, have they confronted you about using substances, right? So have other people noticed these things? Oftentimes addiction is primarily rooted in shame, right? And so maybe you hide it, but has somebody else brought this up to you, right? Um, so next up is when we think about our our emotional out, well, it's kind of tied to our last one. Those are the primary questions, right? If
Yeah.
you take any of those questions and you said yes to at least two of them, then chances are you might be struggling, right? And need some mental health support.
Man, 2 years ago, I could have said yes to all of them.
Right. And, the good thing is that you can use those questions and you can look back and you can say, oh, you could probably do this for a friend or you could do this for yourself. I created a quiz that was developed by a licensed clinician that you can use this, you can take it for yourself or you can take it for a friend that will give you those results, right? And you can have it click yes or no. It'll confidentially send it to you. And we have these quizzes for even specific things like depression or trauma, anxiety, internet addiction, attachment styles, all of these things. So that's like another helpful resource, and I'll share that with you.
Oh, that's pretty cool. I thought about it and it's interesting because, I used to be bad about isolation, but now sometimes when I get a certain way, frustrated, um, it's almost like an intentional isolation step away to
Mm,
quiet. And sometimes it involves Ubering because that's where you're sitting still while you're doing something, but it gives you a chance to think, process. Because I know with me, what in trying to make progress with mental health and everything was, hey, let's figure out what the feeling is, give it a name, and then figure out why exactly, why did this irritate me? What
mm,
about it bothered me? Is it
yes.
about the thing? But sometimes it's about something that's totally different, and that was just the thing that made it surface. And so,
Yeah,
kind of that deliberate isolation, I know I can think of an instant where it happened, and I told my wife, like, I'm gonna go Uber. I got to think this through. Um, but that was definitely one of the things I noticed the most was that isolation. And, at least now I know when I do it, it's deliberate, it's for a reason, it's to
exactly.
quiet the noise so I can process. But I've also taken up journaling kind of to facilitate that along because I think
Yeah,
if
I
you're
don't think what you're talking about is like a negative coping.
yeah.
So like when I heard you describe it as like you found yourself feeling a certain way, you decided to deal with that by spending some time alone, right?
Mhm.
You can be alone without being lonely, right?
Very
You
true. I'm an
can
only
choose to,
child.
yeah, you can spend time alone without isolating yourself, right? When we think about
Mhm.
isolation, we mean turning down events to hang out with people, calling out of work,
Oh
not
yeah.
going to other social gatherings. And the second thing that let me know that, hey, this is okay is like you're talking about how you're mindful of your emotions,
Hmm.
right? So in that time, you're taking time to check in with yourself and say, hey, how am I feeling? What am I thinking about? How does this make me feel? Where am I feeling this in my body? And that's a positive thing. That's actually a good thing. Contrast that though with the way that we have been told to deal with behavior in school, right? So remember in school, you'd act out, a teacher would say, go in the corner or go to timeout or
Hmm.
whatever. And what that taught us is that if I feel upset, I can't be in community, which is a problem. Because remember, we learn how to regulate our emotions through community with others. We first have to learn to co-regulate before we can self-regulate. And so if every time I feel sad or angry or upset, I just get isolated, and nobody tells me how to calm down, I'm not going to learn anything from this. I'm going to feel resentful. I'm going to feel upset. And what it eventually teaches us is that I can't be myself around other people.
Mhm.
And so, like, a better way is, is being able to process and not minimize these things, even if it's not the same thing for you. And then we see this especially with kids. I know when I was a teacher, I made the mistake all the time when my middle schoolers would come to me and they'd say, I'm so mad about this. And I would say, calm down. It's not that big of a deal, yada, yada, yada. What I'm doing is I'm saying, like, not allowing them the space to be able to process their emotions. What I wish I would have said, what I'm teaching others to do now is to be like, tell me more about that. What makes you
Yeah.
feel this way? You know, where do you feel
Yeah.
this in your body? You know, um, why do you think this is and we try to exclude why, because why questions tend to be about blame. It's how do you want to move forward? What do you hope to get out of this? Right? What do you feel like the next step should be? Those are questions I wish I would have asked to be able to help these kids process their emotions. Because even if it's like minimized to me because I have perspective and I'm older, for them it's like really
Right.
important,
My
you
wife,
know?
one time my daughter was felt a certain way, and I remember my wife going like something like, you shouldn't feel that way, or there's no reason to feel that way. And when my daughter left the room, I told my wife, I'm like, look, like, how do you know? This is what she feels, and if she's telling us that, then we
That's
have to
good.
we have to be
Yeah.
respectful for about it, and not, you know, these are her feelings. We have to get to kind of what led to this. What is she going to do about it? What does it mean? Is it really about what this thing was? And, it's like I heard somebody say you can't clean dirt with dirt, and anytime we're pushing back on something like that, hey, you're not making anything better. Somebody's acting a certain way for a reason. Your
Yes.
job is to figure out what that reason is, or bring it to light so that reason can be worked through.
Yeah. And you're bringing up, like, kind of bringing us home with is, how do you help somebody manage change? How do you help somebody process this? And it's the technique of motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing sounds a little weird, but it's not like a job interview. It's actually a way to help people make positive change, right? So, and it can be remembered with four main components
Hmm.
and pretty easy to remember. OARS, or ORS, right? And each letter stands for a different thing. The O stands for open-ended questions. So take the example with your daughter. Um, you ask an open-ended question that does not indicate bias or judgment and doesn't have the inflection of bias or judgment. So I can't say, why are you always feeling this way?
Yeah.
That's an open-ended question that's not gonna, and I also can't give a yes or no thing. Like, do you think we don't care? Right? Like, that's a yes or no question. But if I ask an open-ended question, what happened that made you feel this way?
Yeah.
Right? Um, how long has this been happening with you? Right? Like, open-ended questions. So the first step is asking open-ended questions. Second step is affirming positive change talk. So, or affirmations, OA. So, affirmations are noticing when somebody is saying something that is indicative of a positive coping skill or a positive thought. Right. So, for example, this will also often be hidden in the middle of a lot of negative stuff, right? Like somebody will say, like, I never do anything right. And even though sometimes I get good grades on my test, like I always fail things, the second go around, and like it takes me so much longer and that kind of thing. And what you do with affirmations is you say, I notice that that you also do get, from what you said, you also do get good grades,
Yeah.
right? Um, and the key with motivational interviewing is like, oftentimes if you tell somebody to do something, they will sink their weight like a seesaw and resist it because they don't like to feel out of control, right?
Right.
So if somebody's talking to you about a relationship they have and they're like, oh, this guy, he treats me so bad, he yells at me, he curses at me, he's aggressive towards me, and so you naturally are like, well, you should leave him. Their next thing is usually like, oh, but sometimes he's so sweet though, right? Because they don't like feeling out of control, and so they sink their weight. So as like a parent or as a friend or as a caregiver, it's a really important part to not tell people what to do in this way, but to give them the opportunity to see their thoughts and their words in front of them, which brings us to R, which is reflective listening. So O, open-ended questions, A, affirmations, R, reflective listening. And this is a hugely underdeveloped skill. And what you'll notice is like I did reflective listening earlier on in this interview when we were
Mhm.
talking about, I asked a question, how did you manage to maintain a middle path and not steer too far? And I reflected back to you the key things that you said. And did you feel understood at that time? Right? Did you feel like I heard you? Right? I'm not making a judgment on it. I'm just reflecting back what you said. And the key thing is that most people never hear their words come out of somebody else's mouth, right? We're so good at judging other people. We're so good at being able to say, that's silly or that's stupid. Or we watch reality TV and we're like, how could these people think that way?
Yeah.
But when it's ourselves, we're like often blind to it. What reflective listening does is somebody's able to unbiasedly reflect back what somebody's saying and then be able to analyze their own words and thoughts more objectively, right? So you might say something like, it sounds like, so let me see if I got this right. You feel like this because of this.
Right.
Am I hearing that right? And sometimes they'll be like, yeah, but when you say it, it sounds so stupid. Right? Or they'll say, oh yes, exactly. That's exactly how I feel. And now they feel understood. And then the last OARS, ORS, the S stands for summarizing. And that's where you take, so think about reflections as like a rose and then
Mhm.
summaries as like a bouquet. And I'm taking these different reflections and I'm laying it out in front of this person so that they can then start to see the patterns, right?
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful way to help kids, humans, adults. I use this all the time as a manager within my current job. It's a really helpful way to help somebody process change and to draw out the insight from themselves without telling them what to do. Mental health practitioners use it all the time. And what it allows us to do is to continue to give somebody autonomy to make decisions for themselves, but
Mhm.
also be a good friend or a partner or a listener, in a way that, takes your bias out of the situation and really helps them detangle the cobweb or the knots within their own thoughts into something that is more like streamlined and understandable.
Um, do you were talking about your teaching experience and you wish you had done more of this as opposed to maybe this. What do you think? Of course, we can't have every teacher be a mental health practitioner, but some of this stuff we're talking about, I think would be beneficial. I don't know if it's in the curriculum for teachers, one, but two, also about revamping the education system to where we're teaching the kids about regulation, emotional regulation, the importance of connectivity, especially if it comes to mirroring with co-regulation. Um, these problem solving things, in touch with emotions, because everything is about information to pass a test so that your school can get funded. Um,
Mhm.
you know, what do you think? Is it possible? Is it plausible? Where would it fit? Having been in the education system, do you think it would work or do you think it needs to happen?
Yeah, so I remember I was working with a charter school that was really progressive in that way,
Mhm.
and that they would set time for social emotional learning, right? And so like it would be like a class, right, where we would talk about, let's talk about empathy, and you get a
Right.
curriculum and you would teach them. One, I don't think it was comprehensive enough looking back. Two, I think it wasn't practical enough. Like today, in 5 minutes, I gave you a strategy that you can use to talk with your daughter,
Right.
right? Um, I think that teachers would benefit from having this kind of stuff going on because they're going to use it not just when they're teaching social emotional learning, they're going to use it all throughout the day. And when you think about coping skills and when you think about these things, they happen in the midst of life, right? They happen in the midst of other things. It's never like, now I'm going to work on social emotional learning. It's like,
Right.
no, like I'm encountering stress in real time and then I have to respond to it. And the problem and the challenge that most teachers have is that it interrupts the lesson,
Yeah.
right? It interrupts the way that the flow of the information that you're trying to get conveyed, that's going to be tested, that's going to be done at end of year evaluations. And so a huge part of this is having to reprioritize as you mentioned, as a school, like if my kid gets an A in math, but responds to stress poorly, am I okay with it?
Well, because the other part of that is, if you had teachers on this end, let's say nurturing behaviors and skills for coping, you know, oftentimes the source of a child's stress is not maybe in the classroom in front of you, it's in at home where maybe they don't have the ideal family situation or their
Exactly.
father's an alcoholic or something. And so, it's almost like a disservice not to include, or at least I think as a society to go where this is important, how and where can we add it in, even if we
Hmm.
have to slow down a few other things or
Absolutely.
take a little importance off of this or that, because we're trying to raise good human beings to be good responsible citizens, caring people, care for one another, um, to take the country and into the future, and to take care of us one day because we're going to be
Yep.
old. And it's not just about getting them through or making sure they're this or that. Like, I mean, I know at 10 years old my daughter's not going to be a STEM person. She hates math. She doesn't like any of that stuff. She goes to an art school. She loves arts. She takes jewelry making, one act play, and stuff like that. But it's like, you know, everybody's a little different. And I think
Yeah.
we have to figure out how are we going to put, still keep what's important because we need people in STEM and this and that, but also some of this more like what you might call hippie woo woo stuff. But it's really about, I think, making more emotionally intelligent people to go out and
Yeah.
participate in society.
Yeah. And you brought up a key point. It starts with parents, right?
Mhm.
And that's why, at Sandstone Care, which is the company I work with, um, is a key component that we do is family therapy. Because if a kid comes in individual therapy and group therapy and they learn really positive coping skills and they understand their depression or their trauma, and then they connect with other people who have gone through the same thing, and then they go back to a home environment and those relationships are not the place. Remember, biopsychosocial care, that
Mhm.
social component is a huge part of people being able to get better. And as a kid, you have so little power, right?
Yeah.
You're really subjected to the environment in a lot of ways. And so it's up to us as parents, as friends, as adults, as teachers to be fostering and reinforcing environments for positive mental health. And that requires everybody. Teachers
Yeah.
alone can't do it. Parents alone oftentimes can't do it. They need support too. And it takes all of us, and as a tribe, as a people, we have to come alongside our children, and to be able to all take a part in ownership of that. If you're interacting with kids in any capacity on a given day, you have a chance to be able to show somebody positive ways to be able to deal with stress. and to help them feel understood and listened to, and that their emotions are valid and that they're a unique person who matters. Like you have that power. And it's responsibility for all of us to be able to take part in that process.
I agree. Are there any thought patterns that keep us from grasping some of these things to change or to want to get better?
Yeah, there's a ton of patterns. We call these cognitive distortions.
Hmm.
It's a huge term. We think about things like catastrophizing, minimizing, all or nothing thinking,
Yeah.
basically routines that we've built in our brain or habits that we've built in the way that we think about things that get in the way of us being able to make better decisions, right? And one of the only ways, or sometimes it's trauma, right? I've experienced either a big traumatic event or chronic trauma or developmental trauma when I was a kid. And I've never been able to live my life because that trauma is still triggering me and playing out in everyday life. And so I have to process that. So, like, negative cognitive distortions or patterns of thinking,
Hmm.
negative coping skills that we're comfortable with, but are not producing like long term happiness for us, addiction, and trauma would be like the key things. And that's why like mental health treatment is a real thing. That's why you want to like be focusing on evidence based therapies because this stuff is not simple all the time. And
Hmm.
especially if you're close to someone or if you're close to yourself and you're not able to see your own feelings and actions and stuff objectively, but you know you don't want to continue living the way that you're living, it's really helpful. We need other people to help us through this process. It's a really tough thing to do alone.
Yeah, that all or nothing thing really hit me because I definitely can relate, like when people embark on a fitness journey, the new year, or like let's say, you smoke weed, drink alcohol, and smoke cigarettes. One of our doctors used to say you can't slay all your dragons at once.
Yeah.
Um, you know, take it a step at a time, show yourself some grace because it's about the long-term result. You're more than likely going to stumble a few times and
Yeah.
whatnot. But the important thing is, you make the effort to get back up, figure out where you went wrong, how you can do it better. And sometimes that comes from that connection and community
Absolutely.
with
Yeah.
one another. But one of the things I always like to ask is, what is one thing that you've experienced that's happened um, from leaving teaching and going into this field that's kind of been an unexpected benefit that never would have happened had you not gone into this arena and started with Sandstone?
Yeah. I think the skills that I've been learning when it comes to self regulation, positive coping skills, communication skills have allowed me to be a happy person in all the places and people that I meet and all the places that I go to. And overall, it has given me the tools to live a happier life, right? If I meet somebody at the gym and I'm talking to them, I'm able to listen to them without thinking about what they can give me and just be present and like genuinely care about what they're saying. Right. And that kind of kindness, what I'm seeing it is really rare, for people to like experience somebody who's genuinely just interested in how this person is doing and wants to make sure that this person's okay. And like, I don't have anything else that there's no huge milestone that I'm trying to accomplish when it comes to like my personal life or
Hmm.
whatever. I'm happy to just, as I'm talking to people like yourself, going throughout my life and in the work that I do, help people understand that that there's options out there, right? So like I'm really thankful because I have my own podcast. It's the Treatable podcast.
Hmm.
And for the last 6 years, when I first came into this industry, I was just meeting with doctors and licensed clinical social workers and therapists and psychotherapists and like real mental health practitioners, and I'm talking to them in long form content like we're doing today. And through that, and through my doing my own internal work, like I've become a happier person. And I've been able to like help spread that happiness to like the people that I come into contact with, which makes me feel good, right?
Yeah.
Which makes me feel like I'm doing something right. And like ultimately, my long term goal, like Sandstone Care is a treatment center that focuses primarily on teen and young adult mental health and substance use treatment. And right now, like, you have a kid. How's your kid?
10. We also
10?
have a 20 and a 21-year-old.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, so like all the ages of the people that we serve, right? Like, and as you know, as a parent, if you need to get back to school clothes, you have some brands in mind, or shoes, you
Hmm.
have some brands in mind. If you're getting your kid their first car, you have some brands in mind. But if your kid is struggling with mental health or addiction, there's not some place that comes to the top of your mind.
That's a good point.
And as parent, and like my goal, my goal in the work that I do is that after enough communicating with this, about talking about this, that people will understand that they have an option, right? That there's a place that they can go to when their kid is struggling with their mental health or with addiction, and that they have an option. Why do we live in a society in which like these brands, certain brands for products that don't help us in like our everyday life are
They don't
so
add
well
value.
known? Yeah, but like the thing that actually impacts us being happy as humans is not. And so like part of my work and the reason I do this is to help change that.
I love that. That's really cool. I never thought of it that way, but I did think when I interviewed the CEO and CFO of Next Level University, they had passed $1 million in revenue and 1 million listens on their podcast. And, it was the first time I'd ever thought about money in a way of going, wow, they made $1 million adding value to people. I go, they could have
Mm,
invested in a McDonald's franchise and made $1 million real easy, but it
mm,
doesn't mean they're adding value to people's lives.
mm,
And I think,
yeah.
what you just said about that and the brand thing of, yeah, there's everybody's competing for things that have no benefit for us at all. I mean, maybe enjoyment,
Mm,
like it's nice to have a Coca-Cola Classic with some Pizza Hut. However, um, you know, the real parts of life are the things we're talking about here, your quality of life, and that depends on the quality of your mental health, your biopsychosocial, and if you're
mhm.
aligned. And so, to me, that's what I'm kind of starting to notice more in some of the people I talk to is I really think, you know, the education system needs to be revamped, and why are we all having to learn this shit as adults? Because it's way more difficult to learn, put into practice, and adjust when you have all of life's responsibilities, possibly a kid and all that, to where if you could gain some of these tools the same way we gain basic math skills that have led me into college trigonometry and biostatistics for my master's degree.
Yep.
Why are we not giving some of these, emotional tools to children, just like foundational math, so that when
Mm,
they go to college or after their first corporate job and they understand all these things and it's
yeah.
not such a big deal. But yeah. Well, man, thank you for coming on today. I learned a heck of a lot and I really enjoyed this conversation and um, it's going to give me a lot of stuff to think about, continue to think about, and continue to want to improve.
Yeah, likewise. And I enjoyed our conversation as well. And if people, you know, can I tell can I tell
Yeah, yeah,
people where
yeah.
they
Go
can
for it.
learn
I'm going to
more?
put
Yeah.
everything in the show notes, but plug away,
Yeah.
plug away. Tell us where you
Yeah.
are.
So
Give us about your podcast and any resources.
yeah, if you want those resources, the quizzes to be able to tell if you might need mental health support, or if you want to learn more about teen and young adults, age specific mental health and substance use treatment, you can go to sandstonecare.com, sandstonecare.com. that's the place that you're going to be able to find it. We also have a big YouTube channel
Oh, cool.
where we're constantly putting those resources. We're on all the social medias, Pinterest, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, where we're constantly giving these coping skills and reaching out to kids and to teens and young adults to try and change that narrative of teaching. And if you want to learn more about, mental health specifically, and you felt like you learned something from this, you can also listen to the Treatable podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcast. And each week we just talk about a different mental health challenge or a mental health topic and how it's real. It's more common than we think, but it's also treatable. And we talk about and break down strategies to be able to make that happen.
I love that. Treatable. It's like hope, but
Yes.
the brand thing was really like for me, the whole like, why do we not have why does no brand come to mind when our kids need help? And,
We're working on changing it.
I've had to do that firsthand when you look up like, hey, I want a psychologist. And then it's crazy. So,
Absolutely.
all right. I'm going to go spend some time with my daughter, and I hope you have a great day, and I'm going to remember all these things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was a
Awesome,
pleasure
man.
talking with you.
Yeah. See you, man. Well, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. Remember, go out and be the person that you want to meet.
Asteroid of fear.